Humans are weird Wave Rider 187. Gust incoming, came the distant shout from one of the humans down the massive canyon. Geistig paused in her lecture and tucked her body close down to the lichen-covered rock she and her cluster of graduate students were perched on. The group fell silent as the ever-present canyon wind suddenly increased from its constant whispering to a brief roar. Geistig felt the resulting pressure difference pushing her up and clung to the rock. It was highly unlikely that the wind would lift her mass, but she had to set a good example for her students. The cluster likewise twitched and the wind surged over their fuzzy heads. It finally died down, leaving their auditory membranes ringing with lingering vibrations. Geistig was about to resume her measurements on the teal lichen that she was considering for domestication in their colonies in the roots above the canyon, when one of her graduate students clicked an absently polite interruption. "Yes, TACs?" Geistig asked, without really turning her attention away from the lichen. "What are the humans doing?" TSCs asked, holding up a clarifier in the direction of the mammals in question plus. Geistig fought down a massive shrug of annoyance. As she expected, every one of her graduate students was now turned to focus down the canyon towards the docks where the human submarines surfaced to their crews out for light and air. Stuck didn't know what the humans were doing. She quite frankly didn't care what the humans were doing. Their researches into the mining potential of the canyons and caverns were no doubt productive for the colony and the system in general, but had no effect whatsoever on her own work. Still, the web, like all-encompassing curiosity of a fuzzy young grad student, was something to be harnessed and trained, not suppressed. "What do you observe?" Geistig asked without looking up from her sample. "The humans are gathering at the end of the wave-riding bridge," one stated, taking the clarifier and studying the situation. "They all look very excited," another offered. Geistig was about to inquire how they determined excitement in a bipedal mammal, but another student interjected. "Their large motor movements are faster and shorter than usual," he said, "and their voices have risen in pitch and frequency." "It is only the dock crews," another clarified. "There are no subs docked at the moment. They are arranging themselves in some specific order. They are flexing their muscles. That means they are preparing for sudden movement, not bracing for impact." "The wind bore!" The careful observations broke down into chitterings of stress and excitement that finally succeeded in pulling Geistig away from her work. She stalked over to the student holding the clarifier. "Do remember that these humans are trained professionals and will not stupidly endanger themselves," she reminded them as she took the device. There was an uneasy chitter of agreement as she studied the situation. The windbore was indeed seeming to menace the humans on the dock. The high wind gusts in the canyon, coming on top of the steady, constant breeze, created a long series of tall wave crests that bore down the canyons. It was thanks to these unpredictable and powerful surges that the Trisk science teams had to limit themselves to these high ledges, far from the water's edge. The humans, sturdier and more endothermic, had simply built their docks to withstand the bore waves and trained to work around them. One of the modifications they had insisted was necessary was one wave-riding bridge from one dock to another. This bridge consisted of individual floats that were connected with cables and rested on the water's surface. The design did indeed negate much of the stress caused by the waves, but the design had always struck Geistig as impractical. She could not conceive how the bipeds, always on the verge of falling over, could hope to use the bridge during the bore waves. It looked like she was about to get her answer. The humans were clustered at the end of the wave-riding bridge. Her students had described the situation well. The bore wave struck the end of the bridge and the structure began to undulate. With a resounding whoop from his massive lungs, the leading human rushed out onto the bridge. He made it nearly a quarter of the way across before falling off into the cold waters of the canyon. Frantic chittering broke out from her students, and Geistig raised a griping appendage sternly to silence them. "How are the other humans reacting?" she demanded. There was a long pause as her students considered this question. "They are laughing," one observed. "Another human has already replaced him on the bridge." She fell into. None of the other humans are offering to aid them. The fallen ones appear to be laughing as well. They are swimming for the soft dock. The first humans is running back to the main cluster. They have formed a queue. Not all of the humans are participating. The cluster fell silent to mull over these observations, and Gustic handed the clarifier back to its owner with a profoundly fatalistic shrug. Below them, human after human was hurtling themselves across the undulating wave-riding bridge in what appeared to be an utterly futile attempt to get across it. It was obvious that this was some bizarre from-of-play behavior. There was nothing at the other end of the bridge to tempt them, and their dinghy was conveniently docked beside the main cluster of humans. Gustek knew very well that her own cluster of highly educated university graduates was not going to achieve anything more practical than processing this display of hubris and endothermy on the part of the humans. She might as well pack up her tools and return to her mobile office while they observed the cacophony on the docks. She had several grant proposals to write, and something productive might as well be accomplished. Humans are weird, I just can't anymore. I can't! The wild mammalian wail resounded through the vines of the recovery garden, and First Father set his mandibles in a fixed but hopefully soothing angle to meet this newest bit of madness. I just can't anymore. First Sister? He said in the mother language. His eldest daughter, just finishing her second adult molt, stood from where she had been trimming the seeds pods and wiped her hands briskly clean on her apron. That is second geologist, isn't it? She asked, tilting her head, already half again as broad as his own, to catch the sound on her long antenna. Yes, he replied absently as his fingers ran up and down seed pod he was examining, feeling the firmness of the fruit within. Second geologist is participating in the avian rescue operations in a volunteer capacity. Should I call one of the aunts with medical clearance? She asked. Fifth aunt is very good with humans. I doubt this is a medical issue, First Father said, letting his antenna curl with amusement. You can no doubt meet the situation. First Sister clicked in agreement and trotted off to see what was the matter. She was gone for several shadow passes, and First Father was vaguely aware of the near-rhythmic rising and falling of the humans' distress calls, as Second Geologist explained whatever had disturbed her sense of self-control to First Sister. Finally, the sounds faded away down the path towards the waste disposal area, and First Sister came trotting back with a rather perplexed twitch to one antenna. First, Father automatically reached out to soothe the antenna. And what was all the flutter about? He asked. First Sister hesitated and carefully tied her apron on before beginning to speak. You are aware that the cold bite we had several days ago was a millennium freeze, she said slowly. And what is that? He asked. She angled her head in slight annoyance at him, smelling a lesson prompting, but didn't challenge him directly. This world is prone to freezing, she began. Dropping down below the freezing point of water, I mean. The whole world? First Father said, deliberately stiffening his pseudo-frill in a look of shock. The parts of the world that are... She hesitated, clearly struggling with the word habitable. That are where we like to live, are prone to freezes. Usually it doesn't get cold enough to kill the avians that live out in the water meadows, she went on, but every 1,000 years or so it does. Get cold enough to kill them! All of them, First Father demanded. Gets cold enough to kill a lot of the weaker ones, she amended as she went back to trimming the seed pods. That's why we sent out a call for so many volunteers to help care for the hatchlings. What hatchlings now? First Father asked. You know what hatchlings? First Sister protested. First Father cocked his head at her sternly. But I need to learn to communicate it, First Sister amended. She drew in a long breath and focused. The avians that live in the water meadows, she said slowly. The swimming ones lay their eggs and hatch them at the end of the freeze cycle. Usually it does not get cold enough to endanger the mated pairs who care for the eggs. A few nights ago it did get cold enough and many of the adults died, but they managed to protect their eggs and hatchlings. She clicked her mandibles as she worked over what was important enough to include in the retelling. Usually we wouldn't touch the vine patterns outside of our gardens, she finally decided on. But the avians will make good domesticated animals, and we want a lot of them alive. So if we let these hatchlings die, it will mean there won't be enough for us to gather for our gardens this year and next year. So ants are going out and gathering all the hatchlings of the avians that died and making sure they survive to breed next season. Very good, First Father said, reaching out to pat her head. That was very understandable. Now, what did that have to do with the human's distress call? First Sister shot an odd look in the direction the human had gone. Her mandibles worked as she thought over the situation she had diffused. Humans have a, she struggled with a word, very big hatchling brain part. First, Father couldn't keep back a click of amusement at that description of the human's overdeveloped neonatal programming. Second engineer claimed that hers was overacting and that if she kept trying to feed and clean and provide medical care for the hatchlings, she would endanger them, First Sister explained. Did she fear that her fingers would fail her? First Father asked, feeling more curious now. No, First Sister said slowly. It was very, very much a brain thing. A hatchling brain part thing? First Father asked. First Sister clicked in agreement. She said that the hatchlings, especially the ones who had not grown in their adult feathers, were just too cute, and if she stayed around them, she couldn't help snuggling them. Mammalian snuggling is very dangerous for pre-domestication avians, First Father observed. She knows that, First Sister said. That is why she gave up in the middle of the day. She said the cute was just too much and she couldn't take it anymore. And how did you resolve the situation? First Father asked. I sent her down to where Fifth Aunt is directing the disposal of the plants killed by the freeze, First Sister answered. There is no danger there. The garden fell silent as they mused over this. Perhaps you should call First Observer in, First Father finally suggested. I will if you think it's a good idea, First Sister said obediently. But what will that do? First Observer keeps a canine companion with him for protection and moral support, First Father said. That should give Second Engineer an outlet for her very big hatchling brain part. I do wish you would tell me what the real word is, First Sister clicked a bit sullenly. You know how to work the dictionary database, First Father said with an amused set to his antenna. Now go back to the main hive and radio for First Observer. Humans are weird eye-sits. Tasting the Waves was patiently explaining to the seventh concerned Shatar that his situation was perfectly hygienic, that the presence of the mass of mammalian matter would not pose any danger to her small cousins, that he had every confidence that his symbiotes could easily contain any harmful microbial growth. He had hardly expected his choice to retain the matter for observation would have caused such concern among the families that came to bask in the specific mineral concentrations of the shore where he lived. However, he had hardly begun his observations when the first, a stern third cousin from a nearby hive, had approached his well-marked speaking nodule and had demanded an audience on sanitary issues. The first one had been confusing and had not gone in such a way as to engender friendship with his modal neighbors. However, he believed that he was growing more effective with each confrontation. This particular second brother was a member of a Shatar line that seemed to have favored flashy patterning that pleasantly resembled leaves on a forest floor. Splotches of red mingled with lines of green in a way that almost resembled human camouflage. Tasting the Waves had several thought nodes dedicated to admiring his outer membrane while the greater portion touched his fears and tried to redirect them. How do you propose, he was currently demanding, to manage keeping airborne particles controlled? It is very damp today. It is even starting to rain. That is a circumstance of great benefit to our mutual goals, Tasting the Waves assured him. The general downward motion of the water and the lowered temperature will make spreading of microbes, or even non-viable toxic matter, far less likely. Moreover, the resulting runoff and draining tends to draw the biomatter out into the ocean. But you are actively capturing and holding much of the runoff in your extremities, protested the second brother. I would hesitate to apply the word much, objected Tasting the Waves, and such a motile species as yourself should easily be able to avoid the areas that I store what I do capture in. They are clearly marked as the prime play areas for my sisters, the second brother protested. How will we complete our exterior training if the only places that are not covered in razor grass are... Second brother. A deeper, calmer voice addressed the excited Shatar. The smaller Shatar immediately fell silent and tilted his antenna respectfully at the massive female who approached. Tasting the Waves had lived on this planet for most of his current memory and had over long seasons learned to judge the ages of at least the Shatar very well. This was first sister to the second brother, but she was far, far older than him. Tasting the Waves rather suspected that there had been something unusual in the birth order of the local hive, some interruption on the normal progression of reproduction, but every question he had put forth had been politely but firmly redirected, so he had eventually stopped asking. "I think we can trust that Tastes the Wave won't poison us, second brother," first sister said. "But," second brother protested. First sister clicked soothingly and reached out to run a rough hand over his head between his antennae. "Peace," she said in a firm tone. "You will go down and direct the younger sisters through the safe areas. Keep the microbe sampler out if you feel uneasy. It is a simple thing to... What is distracting you?" Second brother had suddenly twitched his antenna and tilted his head to the side, his pseudo-frill rapidly changing color. First sister altered her position as well, and Tastes the Waves spent some time determining their new concentration vector. It was out towards the beach where the mammalian mass rested on the sand. Tastes the Waves adjusted his focus to the fibers under that area and felt a ripple of surprise. "What are the humans doing?" First sister asked, as they watched the human hatchlings rapidly approaching the decaying mass of mammalian matter. "Hive Smythe organized an outing with the mid-growth stages today," second brother offered, curling his antenna in unease. "We were to meet them on the beach and exchange out-garden survival techniques. That is third brother Smythe and first brother Lee. They are..." He paused and licked his eyes uneasily. "I didn't think that human microbe resistance was quite as high as this behavior indicates," he said, glancing down at Tastes the Waves. "It is," Taste the Waves confirmed. "There are many professions where humans handle decaying mammal material. However, I had assumed the human disgust reaction would not permit them to get so close." "You know Smith Hive better than I do, second brother," first sister said. "Does their third brother have an underdeveloped disgust reaction?" "His is rather overdeveloped, in my opinion," second brother observed. They watched in fascination as the humans rushed up to the dead animal that was the cause of their contention. With his extended tendrils, Taste the Waves could hear the humans chatting and laughing over something. The noise continued as they dropped down onto the carcass as if it was a garden seat. There was a brief moment of silence where the human's mass sank down into the decaying flesh, before they propelled themselves into the air with yowls of disgust and horror, and rushed back to where the rest of their party appeared to be unloading foodstuffs from their vehicle. "That explains the behavior," Tastes the Waves said in a cheerful tone. "They did not see the carcass." "But they must have seen it," second brother protested. "They made it their goal. They thought it was a fragment of a dead tree," Tastes the Waves explained as he was able to extrapolate what he had heard of their conversation. Second brother's antenna curled in irritation. "I know their eyesight is better than that," he protested. "It is odd," first sister interjected smoothly. "Why don't you go investigate?" Second brother turned and scrambled down the path, clicking rapidly to himself. "They couldn't just not notice the mammal body," he grumbled. First sister let her frill glow with amusement and offered a brief thanks to Tastes the Waves before she followed her brother.